Have you ever thought about how the stuff you buy gets to you? Well, we're about to dive into a story that starts on a farm in Peru and ends up in Shanghai. And it's all about China's incredible investment in ports all over the world. But here's the real question. Is this just about making trade easier, or is there a much bigger power play going on?
So let's start with a number. 66,000 metric tons. Just try to picture that for a second. What on earth could weigh that much?
Well, to give you some perspective, that's about the same weight as 440 blue whales. And believe it or not, that's how many avocados China imports every single year. Pretty much all of them from just one country, Peru. And that avocado is our way into this whole story. Because how that one little fruit gets from A to B tells you everything you need to know about how a massive, brand new, Chinese-funded megaport in Peru is completely changing the map of global trade. See, before this port existed, getting those avocados from Peru all the way to China took more than a month. But now, this new deepwater port gives them a straight shot right across the Pacific, and it cuts the travel time by 10 whole days. When you're shipping something that can go bad, that is an absolute game changer. But here's the thing. This story about faster avocados, it's just one tiny piece of a way, way bigger puzzle. And it leads us to the real question we're trying to answer here. Why has China poured decades of effort and billions of dollars into building this global empire of ports? To get to the bottom of that, we first have to look at the powerful economic reasons behind this whole strategy. I mean, at its core, it's about controlling the physical highways that our entire modern economy runs on. And here's why that is so important. Around 80% of all the stuff traded around the world travels by sea. So if you control the ports, you have a huge say in how goods move around the planet. Without those ports, the global economy just stops. Now, this massive network of ports didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It's actually a key part of China's giant Belt and Road Initiative. You can think of it as President Xi Jinping's signature plan to redraw the map of global trade by building huge infrastructure projects along all the old trade routes, both on land and at sea. And the sheer scale of this is just mind-boggling. Since this whole thing started, Chinese companies have invested in 129 different port projects outside of China. We're talking a footprint on every single continent except, Antarctica. And the money behind it is just as massive. Over $60 billion have been invested in these projects. This is not a small, casual investment. It's a very strategic, very long-term plan to get a handle on the world's trade infrastructure. And when you compare that to the US, the difference is, well, it's pretty stark. China's put in $60 billion. The US government's investment? Zero. There's just no American program that's even in the same ballpark for financing or building these kinds of projects overseas. China has basically built an entire system for this, while America's attention has been elsewhere. Okay, but this is where the story starts to get really complicated. Because while the economic reasons make perfect sense, a lot of folks in the West are starting to wonder if there's something else going on. And this gets us to what's called the dual-use dilemma. Are these ports just for business? Or could they also be used for military purposes? So you end up with two totally different ways of seeing the exact same thing. On one hand, China insists these are just economic lifelines, totally essential for global trade. But on the other hand, the US and its allies see a potential strategic threat, that these places could one day be used to dock warships, gather intelligence, or even be used as leverage in a conflict. And if you want to understand why those fears are so real, you have to look at what happened in Djibouti, a tiny country in Africa. It all started out pretty simply, an investment in a commercial port. And then it turned into this, China's first ever official military base on foreign soil. And that exact transformation, from a simple business deal to a military outpost, is the scenario that keeps security experts in the West up at night. And you might be thinking, okay, but that's just one port, right? Well, the thing is, Djibouti might not be a one-off. When you look at the 17 ports where Chinese companies have a majority stake, studies show that 14 of them are physically big enough and deep enough to host military vessels, not just your average container ships. Now, for some crucial context here, it's also important to look at the global military map as it is today. China has one overseas naval base. The United States? It has over 127. So that's a key piece of the puzzle when you think about the different military postures of the two countries right now.
So let's zoom in now and focus on one of the most sensitive spots on the entire planet, a critical shipping choke point that's become a huge source of tension, the Panama Canal.
This quote here from a former U.S. official talking about China's presence there really tells you everything about how seriously America takes this. The tone is intense because the stakes are just incredibly high. And here's why it matters so much. A full 40% of all U.S. container traffic goes through the Panama Canal. It's a vital economic artery that connects the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Any disruption there would be a massive problem. The specific worry here isn't that the Chinese government owns the canal. It's that the ports at both the Atlantic and Pacific entrances are operated by a company based in Hong Kong. And the concern in Washington is that some of the company's executives might have ties to the Chinese Communist Party, which could, in theory, give Beijing influence over this super important waterway. So, where does all this leave us? Well, it feels like we're walking into a new era where the fundamental rules of global trade are being rewritten. And everything is caught in this massive tug of war between economic opportunity on one side and national security on the other. But it's also super important to see this from the perspective of the countries where these ports are being built, like Peru or Nigeria. For them, the debate is a lot simpler. Their officials often say something like this: look, we desperately need these new roads and ports to grow our economies. And right now, China is the only one showing up with the money and the know-how to build it.
So we close with a question that's really going to define the future of the global economy. As this clash between the desperate need for development and these growing fears over security gets more intense, one thing is becoming crystal clear. The competition to control the world's most important shipping lanes has only just begun. And the question of who gets to write the new rules for global trade, that is still very much up for grabs.